Hi, I'm Andrea. I want to talk about something that I'm really interested in, and that's how people use language and literacy and just how people express themselves with language. Something I've been talking to people about a lot is a book that I really love, Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. And we read it in book club, and it's a great book. People loved it, but there are two reactions that come from it. And one is absolute shock that she hasn't used any full stops at all. And people really felt quite deeply that, it's a shocking thing to see no full stops, no punctuation on the page. And other people, when I talk to them about it, just say, great, I hate grammar, I hate punctuation, much better without. I just find that really interesting. I'm not anti-grammar particularly, but there's a time and a place for it. And a lot of literacy happens that isn't as formal as the written word. A little while ago, we made it into Cambridge Library, and I was queuing up, and the lady behind the desk, librarian, was looking up some children's books for me. And she suddenly turned away and she said, oh, I really hate the capital letters that are used in the titles of children's books, because it looks to me like it's shouting. It looks really aggressive, which I was really surprised by. I hadn't actually opened up the conversation with her at all. I was just paying my library fines at that point. But it was so interesting that, and she's right, an awful lot of children's books use big capital letter text. So that's really where I want to start. I want to start with who doesn't like it? Who can punctuation possibly be bad for? Because surely it's a clear communication on the page. Well, apparently for a lot of people, it conveys, full stops convey anger, according to some articles. And it literally feels like aggression to them, which I'm surprised. That seems a wee bit over dramatic to me, but apparently that is how some people feel. The bit that made more sense to me was that if you've written a sentence and you've told people what you want to say, probably via text, and then you add a full stop, apparently that changes the whole tone of what you've said. And it goes from being something like, would you like to do this, to, oh, would you like to do this? Kind of thing, complete passive aggressive kind of reaction. So yeah, I find all that kind of interesting to talk about and think about. Something I really dislike is the term illiteracy. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. I think nobody wants to be illiterate. We don't want people not being able to read, because there are so many things you can't do in society, like, passing your driving test can be really difficult. But I really loathe the attitude that comes with talking about people as being illiterate. Very few people are illiterate. That is not, you don't have to be holding a degree in you don't have to have a master's in Shakespeare to be able to understand what happens on social media, in books, in the world around you, all those signs and signifiers we have that convey and communicate around us every day. And I just don't like that term, because teaching children to read is a long process. And some of the ways we approach that now are not actually particularly beneficial. This is a poem I've always loved, and by Roger McGough. This isn't my spelling, this is how the poem is written, and it's one of those ones that look incredibly simple, and actually it isn't. So streaming, which I'm sure everybody knows, people used to be putting streams throughout primary and secondary school, and in the past, children would have to sit in ranked places in the classroom, and completely shit practices like that occurred in the past. But here we are. I am in the bottom stream, which means I'm not bright. Don't like reading, can't hardly write. But all these divisions aren't really fair. Look at the symmetry, no stream in there. And again, it looks so simple on the page, doesn't it? But it takes you right back to those ideas of equality and division in society. And it takes you back to the line about the rich man in the castle and the poor man at the gate. which apparently comes from All Things Bright and Beautiful, which I didn't know. It's a hidden verse, a not very pleasant verse of that. So yeah, it's just something I really like. And then another thing is, so this is a shamrock. I'm absolutely certain people understand that, so I'm not quite sure why I'm saying it. But my father is semi-literate. He grew up in an era in Ireland where the schools were run by the Christian Brothers. And what that meant, if you wrote with your left hand or you made some blots on the page with your ink pen, is they'd just wallop you, because that is a really effective way to teach children to read. So he's a perfectly intelligent person. He's very interested in arts and culture. You know, his literacy is fine now. But he is what you would class illiterate. And when you look at Irish people and illiteracy, there's quite a lot in there. If you go back far enough, Irish people stopped using the Irish language, which is an incredibly rich and literate oral language, and they were asked to use English. So when you come across people laughing at poor punctuation or grammar in some letters from perhaps, you know, times of the war and things, it's actually a pretty terrible thing to do. There used to be this dreadful comic tea towel that I used to see in Ireland all the time, and even when I was a child I sort of knew it wasn't really right, and it was called something like the poor Irishman writing home to his mammy, and it's kind of funny in a way, but it was all kind of, you know, the punctuation is terrible, it's all silly comic turns on things. I mean, it is a comic piece in a way, but it's also a slur. And I don't find that amusing at all. I've noticed that when I looked for it on the internet, all the punctuation and grammar had been updated to be regular English. Yeah, so I suppose I just don't think illiteracy is anything more than a really unpleasant word and a bit of a slur in itself, really. And here's one reason why I think this. This is how we teach reading in the country at the moment. Over here, we've got the kind of reading which preschool children, young children, and quite frankly, children right through to secondary school probably do. And we hand children really rich, beautiful text full of colour and animals and storylines you can see on the page. And most children adore books. You know, they gravitate towards them and you share that moment with the child. So that's actually an awful lot of literacy happening there. You talk about it. The talking about the book is as vital as decoding those words on the page. And in fact, so much imagination occurs there. In some ways, it's, you know, I wonder if, you know, we could do a lot more with that, really. What happens then for quite young children in our culture at this point in time is we introduce phonics and we introduce writing. So we look less at the picture and we talk less about the picture, which I think is a shame, because so much the talk for writing is so important. And we move to teaching, you know, the grapheme on the page. And that's kind of okay, because the majority of these words here, the child associates the sound you make with your mouth with the grapheme on the page eventually. So at, okay, there is not phonetically regular, so that's a little bit of a problem, but you can sight read that. But then that starts becoming difficult for some people. And if you're only sort of 6 or 7 and you're already starting to find this stuff quite difficult, that's kind of a poor outcome for a bit later on. And it's a poor outcome because you've moved away from just enjoying those wonderful stories and children's illustrations. And then you get this wonderful thing over here. And every single one of those sounds says I. It could be I. So capital I looks different on the page all the time. It could be I as in pie. It could be I as in bright or night. It could be split digraph I. It could be a Y, which is kind of a part-time I. You know, it's hard work for children to learn all these things at such a young age. Most of them do it most of the time, and mostly it's okay. It's just a shame to come away from all that richness there. I'm making myself sound really anti-educational here, which I'm not, because I've taught lots of people to read. I love books. But learning to read and write is hard work. This is some of the examples of kind of literacy around us, communication around us that happens that isn't formal writing, but there's a lot of it. Graffiti is one example. I don't mean sort of horrible graffiti where people have written an insult, although that happens. And we know what happens because we've got graffiti from ancient Rome where people have literally written, you know, things like, I hate Claudius and his sandals really smell, or, you know, I really hope so-and-so business fails, or, you know, really terrible things. You get that real insight into what people were thinking and doing at the time. And it's still with us, whether you like graffiti or not. Political slogans are all around town at the moment. Yeah. And I read a book about medieval graffiti in churches, and I know from reading, not because I don't know, that the walls of churches were absolutely covered in paints and designs and pictures, and people read those pictures. You know, you might regard medieval people as being illiterate, that word I don't like, but actually they had a very rich world, and those frescoes on the wall, people would pray watching them or tracing the lines of them with their eyes, or I don't know, maybe even they touched them and followed them through with their hands, fingers. So that's a kind of reading in itself as well. But we also know that there was what we describe as graffiti in these churches, where people left they left things like, say, a drawn-on image of a ship, because people were going sailing along, you know, people were leaving, sailing off, and they might not see them again. And that graffiti was left quite prominently for other people to see. It wasn't painted over or disguised or hidden under things. It was a form of communication. And then just looking at the modern world, if you look at graffiti, and I don't know why I'm so drawn to it, but I always have been really interested in reading what you can see in the street. There is a lot to read if you just look around, and you see graffiti these days beginning to use hashtags and emojis far more than any grammar or punctuation. This one is using an exclamation mark and it's using a hashtag. But I think if you just look around at the casual graffiti, even the horrible stuff, I think you will see hashtags being used quite a lot. Oh, so this is a famous poem using emojis. See if you can decode that one. Probably can. So it's tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. And there's lots and lots out there where people have used emojis and tried to put it together. And of course it isn't anything. It doesn't really convey what Blake was writing about. And yet at the same time, it's kind of fun. You can read it just about. Yeah. I don't know. I think, I don't know why I really wanted to talk about it. It's just something I feel passionate about, and something that I am really interested in how people express themselves through formal and informal means, not meals. And I wanted to go back to the librarian saying about the text being shouty. And it just made me think that if you got a birthday card through the post and it was all capital letters and big exclamation marks, then perhaps that person isn't really wishing you a happy birthday at all. I'm going to stop there.